Have you ever looked at someone and thought you had them all figured out just based on what they wore or what they looked like or maybe even how they smelled? Yeah, we all do it sometimes, don't we? We size people up before they even open their mouths. But what if I told you that today's story will make you stop, freeze, and question every single snap judgment you've ever made? What if the person you ignored, mocked, or looked down on had more power than anyone else in the room? More respect, more influence, and more wealth than you could ever imagine? You clicked on this video because something inside you whispered, what really happened to that woman who humiliated the poor man? Well, stay with me because you are about to get the exact answer you came here for. And trust me when I say, this isn't just another feel-good story. This one changes you. Hey you. Yes, you watching this right now. I know you're probably on your couch or scrolling while eating lunch or maybe even listening in your car during a long drive. But wherever you are, pause for just a second and really hear me out because this story, this exact story, might reflect a part of you that you've hidden away. Maybe you've judged someone before, not realizing their worth. Maybe you've been judged. Or maybe you've watched it happen, stayed silent, and carried that guilt around ever since. This story touches all of that. It reaches into that quiet place inside all of us that remembers what it felt like to be overlooked, dismissed, treated like we didn't matter. But it also reminds us of something far more powerful, that moment when the truth flips the whole world upside down. So here's what you need to know before we dive in. This isn't just a story about a rude woman in a fancy restaurant or a man dressed in old jeans and a worn-out hoodie. It's a story about ego. About the layers people wear to hide their fears. About power that doesn't scream with gold watches or expensive suits, but whispers through humility and quiet confidence. It's also about you and what you would do if you were in that restaurant that day. Because today, I'm going to take you back to a moment that shook the entire room. A moment that would leave one woman humiliated, a group of strangers stunned, and a so-called poor man smiling, not out of revenge, but from a place of truth that no one saw coming. Let me take you to a restaurant, not just any restaurant though. We're talking high-end, Instagram-worthy, candlelit tables, $150 steaks, and valet parking out front. The kind of place where waiters don't just bring your food, they present it. The vibe is luxury. The air smells of truffle oil and pride, and the people? They dress to impress. You know the type. Designer bags, $1,000 shoes, loud laughs meant to be heard. And right in the middle of all this polished glamour, he walks in. His name is Caleb. But in that moment, nobody cared what his name was. They just saw his beat-up sneakers, his faded hoodie, and the kind of tired in his eyes that comes from more than just a long day. His beard was scruffy. His jeans were torn at the knees. And as he shuffled through the entrance, conversation stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. A hostess blinked, unsure whether to greet him or call security. And then she saw her, sitting 2 tables from the window, hair sleek, nails perfect, phone in hand, her gaze sharp like glass. Her name? Miranda. Now Miranda wasn't just anyone. She was someone. Influencer, realtor, life coach. At least, that's what her bio said. And if there's one thing Miranda hated, it was her image being disturbed. She was on a lunch date with her equally glamorous friend, live streaming bites of her kale salad and sipping sparkling water like it was liquid gold. And then Caleb, our poor man, wandered into her frame. Just like that, her followers saw him. And Miranda? She couldn't let that slide. Now pause. Right here. Let me ask you something deep. What would you do if you saw someone like Caleb walk into a space where he clearly didn't belong? Would you look away? Would you whisper to your friend? Would you get up and ask him to leave? Or would you offer him a seat at your table? The answer matters more than you think, because what happens next will challenge your definition of value. Miranda's voice cut through the restaurant louder than it needed to be. She said things that made people cringe, called him out for smelling, accused him of begging, said this wasn't a soup kitchen. The room fell silent, except for a few chuckles from those who were too insecure to do anything else. Caleb didn't respond. Not right away. He just stood there, eyes scanning the room. Calm. Collected. almost like he was waiting for something. And you might be wondering, why didn't he walk away? Why didn't he fire back? Why didn't he defend himself? That's the first real clue. Caleb wasn't there by accident. He was playing a game Miranda didn't even know existed. Because this poor man, this guy in ripped jeans and silence, he owned more than just his pride. He owned the entire restaurant. But Miranda? She had no idea who she was shaming. She thought she was putting a stranger in his place. What she was really doing was digging a hole, one that would get deeper with every cruel word. And you're about to see exactly how that hole became the stage for the biggest reality check this restaurant had ever witnessed. You're probably already forming your opinions, thinking, I would never treat someone like that. Or maybe you've seen this happen before in real life or online. The classic don't judge a book by its cover moment. But what makes this story different isn't just the twist. It's the why. Why did Caleb choose that day, that restaurant, that outfit? Why didn't he reveal himself right away? Why let himself be humiliated? Because here's where the story flips. Caleb wasn't there to be a victim. He was there to test the culture he built. To find out what kind of people were filling his chairs, eating his food, working under his roof. And Miranda? She just became the face of everything he was trying to root out. Now take a breath, because we're only getting started. The moment Miranda realized who Caleb really was didn't just silence her, it shook everyone watching. Phones stopped recording. Apologies came too late. And you, sitting there watching this story unfold, are going to feel every ounce of tension that filled that room when the truth came crashing down. But not yet. Because the reveal? That's the part that hits the hardest. And I want you to feel every emotion that led up to it. The arrogance. The discomfort. The raw, real judgment that so many people carry but never admit. This story? It's not about revenge. It's about redemption, humility, and the human spirit when it's underestimated, overlooked, and finally unleashed. So stay with me. Don't click away. Don't miss this. You're about to see what happens when the world finally sees the man it tried to ignore, and the woman learns a lesson she'll never forget. And just when she thought it could, Caleb wasn't always the silent type. In fact, just a few months ago, you would have found him hosting wine tastings at that very same restaurant, charming guests with his soft-spoken charisma and knowledge of every ingredient on the menu. But something had changed recently, and not just in how he looked. People in the neighborhood whispered that Caleb had disappeared, just like that, vanished without a trace. The staff had no clue where he'd gone. Some said he was traveling, others said he was scouting new restaurant locations. But the truth? The truth was wrapped in something more personal, more painful. Caleb had taken a step back from the spotlight after a betrayal that cut deeper than most could imagine. A close friend, maybe even someone he considered family, had turned on him, leaked private business documents, and nearly cost him the entire restaurant chain he'd built from scratch. Caleb wasn't just recovering financially. He was healing from a wound that no dollar amount could fix. And maybe, just maybe, today's appearance was part of a bigger plan. As he stood there, silent, the weight of that betrayal clung to him like the dust on his hoodie. But no one in the restaurant saw that. All they saw was what Miranda saw, someone who didn't belong. They didn't see the man who had once cooked for celebrities, who used to spend weekends delivering leftover meals to shelters without telling a soul. They didn't see the man who had built his business on kindness, who knew every dishwasher's name, who paid staff above minimum wage because he'd once been one of them. That's what stung the most. Caleb had walked in not to cause a scene, but to see if the heart of his restaurant was still beating the way he left it, or if it had become just another cold, beautiful place where appearances mattered more than people. Miranda, oblivious to all of this, kept talking. Loudly. Harshly. And the more she spoke, the more the other diners shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they should intervene or stay quiet. Her friend across the table gave a few nervous laughs, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge her. That was Miranda's power. She knew how to control a room, especially one where people cared more about reputation than doing what was right. But what she didn't know was that Caleb had been watching this pattern for weeks now. He'd come in a few times, always dressed differently, always unannounced, blending in as someone less than, just to see how his staff and customers responded to people they didn't recognize. Some were kind, some weren't. But Miranda had crossed a line that Caleb couldn't ignore. There was something else going on, too, something no one in that restaurant could have guessed. Caleb had been receiving anonymous messages for weeks. Notes slipped under his door. Emails from fake accounts. Warnings, threats, cryptic questions like, "Do you really know who's dining at your table?" And "Be careful who you trust," again. At first, he thought they were just spam. Then, 2 of his managers quit within a week. One claimed family issues. The other? She didn't even say goodbye. Just left her keys and walked out. Something wasn't right, and Caleb knew it. That's why he returned the way he did, disguised, underestimated, and ready to find out who was loyal and who was playing a deeper game. And here's where the mystery thickens. Because Miranda? She wasn't just some random guest. She had connections to the real estate world, yes, but she also had links to a new investment group that had been sniffing around Caleb's property for months. There were rumors of a buyout. Whispers that someone wanted to transform the restaurant into a high-end lounge, scrap the menu, lay off the staff, and rebrand it completely. Miranda had posted cryptic hints on her socials about a big deal coming through soon, one that would give her control over a prime piece of city culture. Nobody put the pieces together, until today, until she opened her mouth in the middle of Caleb's restaurant, disrespecting the very man who could either make her career or destroy it. Still, Caleb said nothing. But his eyes? They were working overtime, scanning faces, watching reactions. And when the door opened again, he didn't even flinch. But the tension in the room changed instantly. A tall man in a sharply tailored suit stepped in, flanked by a woman in dark sunglasses and an expression that said she'd rather be anywhere else. Caleb recognized them both, but they pretended not to see him. The man was Leonard Pierce, the city's newest hospitality tycoon, a guy known for buying out struggling restaurants and turning them into overpriced nightclubs. The woman was Ava. Once upon a time, she'd been Caleb's closest confidant, and the last person to have access to the files that leaked. What were they doing here? And why now? Miranda perked up at the sight of them. Suddenly, her tone softened. Her back straightened. She smoothed her hair and lowered her voice to something sweet and polite. She knew them too. Maybe not well, but well enough to know they were people worth impressing. That's when it clicked. She wasn't just being rude for the sake of being rude. She was putting on a performance. One meant to show Leonard and Ava that she had the guts to control a room, that she knew how to manage undesirables, that she was ready for a leadership position in whatever venture they had planned. And in doing so, she exposed not just her cruelty, but her desperation, her ambition, and her blind spot. Because Miranda didn't just fail to recognize Caleb. She failed to recognize what kind of man he was. A man who didn't need to shout to be heard. A man who saw every angle before he made a move. A man who'd already figured out who was behind the leaks and was simply waiting for the perfect moment to make it public. But there's something even you don't know yet. Because the truth is, Caleb's return wasn't just about checking the culture of his restaurant. It wasn't just about catching Miranda or confirming Leonard's intentions. It was also about one more person, someone nobody has mentioned yet. Someone in the kitchen. Someone quiet, loyal, and possibly the missing piece of a puzzle that had been haunting Caleb for months. So now you're probably wondering, who's really pulling the strings here? Is Miranda just a pawn? Or is she deeper in than we think? Is Ava back to make peace or finish what she started? And what's Caleb's next move? Because right now, he hasn't even revealed his name. To Miranda, to the staff, or to the investors now circling the room like vultures. And just when you think you've got it figured out, something happens that shifts everything again. Caleb moves, slowly, calmly, and walks past Miranda, heading straight for the kitchen. What's waiting for him back there? A friend? A foe? Or the final clue that will bring the whole mystery crashing into the light? Stay with me. You don't want to miss what's coming next. And get worse, the door opened again. As Caleb stepped into the kitchen, the familiar hum of busy chefs and the scent of sizzling dishes filled the air, but there was something different today. The usual flow of energy felt off. It was like a ripple in the calm before a storm, and Caleb could feel it. He was a master of reading people, and as he scanned the room, the tension was unmistakable. The usual chatter and laughter of the staff had been replaced with nervous glances and awkward silences. There was a palpable sense of unease in the air, and for a moment, Caleb wondered if someone had been tipped off about his presence, if someone knew he was here not as a guest, but as the owner. His head chef, Leo, a burly man with tattoos on his arms and a heart of gold, caught his eye. For a split second, Caleb saw a flicker of something in Leo's expression. Was it fear? Or guilt? Leo quickly averted his gaze and continued chopping vegetables, but it was too late. Caleb had seen it. Something was wrong. The kitchen, once a place of camaraderie and efficiency, now felt like a battlefield. Caleb took a deep breath, steadying himself, before walking over to Leo. "Everything okay, Leo?" he asked, keeping his tone casual, as though he had noticed the odd tension that had settled over the room. Leo paused, his knife hovering in midair, before he responded. "Yeah, just a lot going on today," he muttered, not quite meeting Caleb's eyes. "You know how it is." But Caleb knew Leo well enough to know when he was lying. There was more to it than just a busy lunch rush. Something deeper was at play here. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't just about Miranda and the confrontation in the dining room. There was something else, something bigger, something that connected to the leaks, to the strange disappearances, and to the odd messages he had been receiving. Something that someone in this kitchen didn't want him to uncover. As Caleb began to probe further, he felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He fished it out, expecting it to be a message from his lawyer or maybe a quick update from his accountant. But instead, it was a cryptic email with no subject line, just a single sentence. "Stop looking. It's too late to fix this." A chill ran down his spine. Who was sending him these messages? And why now? His mind raced, but he had no time to dwell on it. The email was just one more piece of the puzzle, one more warning that things were spiraling beyond his control. But before he could even respond, there was a loud bang from the back door of the kitchen. Caleb turned sharply, his heart skipping a beat. Someone had just slammed the door open, and as he rushed toward the sound, he found one of the servers, Emily, standing in the doorway, her face pale and breathless. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. "Caleb, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaky. "In the office, it's gone." "Gone?" Caleb repeated, his pulse quickening. "What's gone?" "The file," Emily said, her eyes wide with panic. "The one with the legal documents. The one with the contracts for the expansion and everything. It's missing." Caleb froze. The file. The one that contained all the details about his restaurant's future plans, the expansion, the potential deals, the investors, everything that had been so carefully planned and locked away for security. How could it just disappear? His mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario. The only people who knew about that file were a handful of trusted individuals, his attorney, Leo, and a few key staff members. And while Caleb trusted his team, something told him that whoever was behind the strange messages and disappearances had planned for this moment. They were closing in, tightening the noose around his neck. Someone was trying to cover their tracks, and they had just made a dangerous move. Caleb stepped toward the office, his mind racing. The moment he entered, he saw that Emily wasn't exaggerating. The file wasn't just misplaced, it was gone. And what struck him most was that there were no signs of forced entry. The office door had been locked, and the only other person who had a key was his old friend, Ava. But why would she? Before he could finish the thought, his phone buzzed again. Another message. His fingers trembled as he read it. "You're getting too close, Caleb. You need to stop digging. If you value your restaurant, you'll walk away." This time, Caleb didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. But just as he was about to respond, the door to the office opened, and Leo stepped inside, his face drawn with concern. "Caleb, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. Caleb narrowed his eyes, sensing the gravity of the situation. "About what?" "It's not just the file," Leo said, stepping closer, his voice barely above a whisper. There's been talk, whispers about Ava. She's been meeting with Leonard Pierce and his team. I don't know the details, but I don't trust her anymore. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. Ava? His friend, the one who had been by his side through thick and thin, the person who had been a trusted confidant? Could she really be involved in this? The possibility made Caleb's blood run cold. If Ava was behind the leaks, if she was working with Leonard Pierce to steal his restaurant, everything he had worked for, everything he had built, would be lost. But as Caleb turned toward Leo, a shadow crossed his mind. What if Leo wasn't as trustworthy as he appeared to be? After all, Leo had been in the kitchen the entire time, and he had been acting strange ever since Caleb had walked in. Was Leo trying to warn him, or was he leading him into a trap? Suddenly, everything felt like it was falling apart. There were too many questions and not enough answers. Who was playing Caleb? Who was behind the disappearances? And what did Ava and Leonard Pierce really want? As Caleb's mind raced, the phone in his pocket buzzed again. This time, it was a picture. A blurry image of a familiar face. But when Caleb zoomed in, his blood ran cold. It was Ava, standing outside the restaurant late at night, talking to someone in a dark car. The person's face was obscured, but the message was clear. Things were spiraling fast. Caleb wasn't just fighting for his restaurant anymore. He was fighting for his entire future. And as he stared at the image on his phone, he realized that someone had been playing him from the start. But who?
And why?
The twist was coming, and Caleb didn't know if he was ready for what lay ahead. The real question now was, who could he trust? Caleb stood frozen, staring at the image on his phone. The blurry face of Ava, meeting with someone in a car, sent a surge of dread through him. He didn't know who the person was, but that didn't matter right now. The implications were clear. Someone was playing a game much larger than he'd anticipated, and Ava was likely more involved than he'd ever imagined. His mind raced, trying to connect the dots, but before he could even think through his next move, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message from the anonymous tipster. It was a text from someone he hadn't heard from in weeks, his sister, Claire. She'd always been his rock, the one person who knew about his struggles, his triumphs, and his losses. Claire wasn't just family, she was also his confidant, and he hadn't shared anything about the recent mess with her. The text was simple, yet jarring. Caleb, I think I'm being watched. Please call me. His stomach sank. He had no idea why Claire would be involved in all this. She wasn't part of the restaurant world, and certainly not part of his inner circle of business associates. But something in the back of his mind told him this couldn't be a coincidence. His sister had always been a calm, collected person, not the type to panic over a strange feeling. But now, she was clearly rattled. Something was happening, something connected to him, his past, and everything that was unraveling in front of him. It was as if the web of deception he had been caught in was growing wider by the hour, and Claire was somehow tangled up in it. Without thinking twice, Caleb dialed her number. He had to hear her voice, to find out what was really going on. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice trembling on the other end. Caleb, I don't know who to trust anymore. I've been getting strange calls. People asking questions about you, about the restaurant. Wait, slow down. Caleb interrupted, his mind reeling.
Who's been asking about me?
What kind of questions? I don't know. They don't say who they are. Just vague things like, is Caleb still running the restaurant? And does he have any plans to sell? Claire's voice shook. At first, I thought it was just some wrong numbers, but I've been getting them more often. The calls aren't from anyone local, Caleb. They're from block numbers. And there's something else. Every time I pick up, there's a long silence before they hang up. Like they're waiting for something. Caleb's mind was spinning. This wasn't just about his restaurant anymore. This wasn't even just about Miranda, or Ava, or Leonard Pierce. Whoever was orchestrating this had their sights set on him, and on those close to him. It was clear now that this was much bigger than a simple business deal gone wrong. Someone wanted him out of the picture, and it seemed like they were using everyone he loved to get to him. Claire, are you okay? Caleb asked, trying to steady his own pulse. He had to stay calm. for her and for himself. But something wasn't sitting right. He knew Claire. She wasn't one to be easily frightened. So, why was she so rattled? Who was behind these calls, and why hadn't they targeted him directly? Why go after his sister? I don't know, Caleb, but I'm scared. I think it's all connected. I know you've been dealing with stuff at the restaurant, and I don't want to get involved in all of it, but this feels wrong. Caleb could hear her voice break, and it made his stomach twist. He couldn't protect her from whatever was coming. She was too far away, and right now he had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. But one thing was certain, whoever was behind this, whoever was sending these threats, knew exactly how to hit him where it hurt the most. And they were willing to go after anyone, even Claire, to get what they wanted. I'm going to figure this out, Claire. Don't answer any more calls, okay? I'll call you back as soon as I can. Stay safe. He hung up, his mind racing with new questions. How did Claire get caught up in this? What was the connection between her and the people trying to destroy him? Just as he was about to turn around and head for the exit, something caught his eye. One of the servers, Jamie, was standing off to the side near the kitchen door, looking out of place. Normally, Jamie was a quiet, hard-working guy, someone who would never draw attention to himself. But tonight, he looked nervous, his eyes darting between the ground and Caleb, like he was trying to decide whether or not to say something. Caleb walked over slowly, trying not to alarm him. "Hey, Jamie," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You okay?" Jamie looked up, and for a split second, Caleb saw the fear in his eyes. He was about to speak when a sudden noise came from the back of the restaurant, sharp, like the sound of something heavy being dropped. Without warning, Jamie flinched, and Caleb noticed that his hands were trembling. I need to go," Jamie said quickly, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't wait for Caleb to respond. He turned and practically bolted out of the kitchen, leaving Caleb standing there, confusion and suspicion building in his mind. Something was off. There was no doubt about it. Jamie's reaction had been too instinctive, too panicked. It wasn't like him. Was Jamie involved in this somehow? Had he been playing both sides, working with Ava or someone else to sabotage the restaurant? Caleb had always trusted him. But now? Caleb didn't know who he could trust. In the next few minutes, Caleb found himself back in the office, piecing together his thoughts. The file had vanished. Claire was in danger. And Jamie? He'd just disappeared in a way that felt planned. But what was the bigger picture here? Was someone manipulating him into thinking he was losing control, or was there something more sinister at play? His phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was different. It wasn't a threat, and it wasn't a clue. It was a link. Caleb hesitated for a moment before clicking on it, holding his breath as the page loaded. What he saw next made his stomach drop. It was a news article from 2 years ago about a massive financial scandal involving one of the biggest investors in the restaurant industry. Caleb scrolled through the article, his heart pounding as the name Leonard Pierce appeared again and again. The article detailed how Pierce had used underhanded tactics to buy up failing businesses and rebrand them for a quick profit. It was a story of manipulation, lies, and ruthless ambition. But one detail stood out above all. The article mentioned a mysterious partner behind Pierce, a name Caleb had never heard before, Ava Roberts. The connection was clear now. Ava had been involved in Pierce's shady deals long before Caleb even realized who Leonard Pierce was. But what did that mean for her relationship with him? Was she working with him all along? Or had something changed? Caleb leaned back in his chair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The stakes were higher than ever. Claire was in danger, his restaurant was at the center of a conspiracy, and now he realized that the very person he'd trusted most, Ava, had been playing him from the start. But there was still one question he didn't have an answer for. Who else is in on this? And just as he started to wonder if he could trust anyone, the phone rang again. This time, it was a number he didn't recognize. When he picked up, all he heard was a whisper, just a breath on the other end. "Don't trust her." The line went dead, and Caleb was left in the silence, feeling more lost than ever. The tension in Caleb's mind had reached its breaking point, the walls of his confusion closing in on him with every passing moment. The threats, the strange disappearances, Claire's warning, and the unexpected messages had all been pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. But as the last cryptic message echoed in his head, a chilling thought struck him. What if it wasn't just a matter of someone trying to take the restaurant from him? What if the real game was something far darker? He'd spent hours piecing together the fragments of his life, his business, and the people closest to him, but what if it was all an illusion? What if the real truth was something he'd missed all along, something he hadn't seen because he'd been too focused on the wrong people, the wrong suspects? What if everything he thought he knew about the people he trusted was completely wrong? The thought gnawed at him as he walked through the empty halls of his restaurant. The quiet was unsettling, and for the first time in weeks, Caleb felt completely alone. His phone had been eerily silent since the last call, and despite his best efforts, he hadn't been able to track down Jamie or Leo or anyone who might shed some light on the situation. He was on his own, trapped in a web of lies with no way out. But as Caleb passed by the old storage room near the back, something caught his eye. The door was slightly ajar, and the dim light flickering inside made the space feel almost inviting. Normally, this area was off-limits, but for some reason, it felt like now or never. He hesitated, his hand lingering on the doorknob. Maybe this was where it all began. Maybe this room held the answers he needed to make sense of the madness. With a deep breath, Caleb pushed the door open. What he found inside made his blood run cold. The room, normally used for supplies and storage, was empty, except for a large, dusty file cabinet against the far wall. The cabinet was locked, but it wasn't the locked drawer that made Caleb's heart stop. No, it was the file on top of the cabinet, barely visible under the low light. He didn't know why, but something told him that file was important. The name written in faded ink on the cover, Ava Roberts, sent a shock through him. He yanked the file down, feeling his breath catch as he flipped it open. It wasn't just any file. It was a collection of documents, contracts, and business plans that linked Ava to some of the most high-profile business figures in the city, including Leonard Pierce. But as Caleb skimmed the pages, the details grew more and more startling. There were financial transactions that went back years, involving hundreds of thousands of dollars, all tied to a hidden account that Caleb didn't recognize. As he flipped through the last few pages, one document made his hand shake. It was a partnership agreement, signed not just by Ava, but by Caleb himself.
Wait. What?
Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as he reread the signature, his own name scrawled at the bottom of the page, dated just a few months ago. How could this be possible? He hadn't signed anything with Ava recently. The only thing he remembered signing was the contract for the restaurant's expansion, and that had nothing to do with her. Or had it? A flood of confusion and disbelief rushed through Caleb. He was on the verge of a massive discovery, but the weight of the new information was almost too much to process. Ava, who had always been his friend, his confidant, someone he trusted without question, had been playing him all along. She had pulled him into some sort of secret business venture that he had no memory of. How had this happened? How had she manipulated him so effectively? The room felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in on him, and Caleb had to fight the urge to collapse. His mind reeled, struggling to find a way to make sense of the betrayal, but the answer wasn't coming. What if everything he had built in the restaurant world, everything he had worked so hard to achieve, had been a setup from the start? Had he been unknowingly walking into a trap, a scheme designed to pull him under while Ava and Leonard Pierce reaped the rewards? But there was more, far more, than just a business deal gone wrong. Caleb's eyes flicked back to the file, and something in the margins caught his attention. A small, handwritten note in Ava's handwriting. "He's the key. You know what you have to do." The words hit Caleb like a slap in the face. He wasn't just a pawn in Ava's game. He was the target. All the time, he had believed he was in control, that he was fighting for his future, but the truth was, he had been set up. The entire time, the person he trusted most had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes, and now Caleb was trapped in a game he didn't fully understand. It wasn't about the restaurant. It wasn't about money. It was about him. Whatever Ava and Leonard had planned, it revolved around him, and Caleb didn't know how or why. Just as Caleb tried to make sense of the note, he heard a sound behind him. Footsteps. He spun around, but it was too late. Before he could react, someone grabbed him from behind, pulling him into the shadows. Looking for answers, Caleb? The voice was low, familiar, and it made Caleb's stomach drop. It was Leo. But the man standing in front of him wasn't the same Leo he'd trusted for years. There was something cold in his eyes now, something calculating. The warmth Caleb had once seen in him was gone, replaced by a look that sent shivers down his spine. "I told you," Leo said, his voice devoid of any empathy. "You should have stayed out of this." Everything Caleb thought he knew, the people he trusted, the choices he made, had just been turned upside down. And as Leo stepped forward, the truth hit Caleb like a freight train. This wasn't just a betrayal by Ava. This had been carefully orchestrated by Leo as well. The man who had been his closest ally, his right hand, was just as much a part of the scheme as anyone else. He wasn't just working for Ava and Leonard Pierce, he was working with them. Caleb had no idea how deep the deception went, or how many people were involved in the conspiracy against him, but one thing was clear. The game had changed. His world was no longer his own. The stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined, and as the truth began to unravel, Caleb realized that everything he thought he knew was just a smokescreen designed to blind him to the real enemy. "Now," Leo continued, his voice steady, "it's time to make sure you stay out of the way for good." And with that, Caleb's heart sank. Everything he had been working toward, every step he had taken, had led him to this moment. But in that instant, he understood. He wasn't just a player in this game. He was the prize. Caleb stood in the dim light of the storage room, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them comforting. Leo's cold eyes burned into him, but Caleb couldn't focus on that. All he could think about was the impossible choice now laid out before him. It was as if the world around him had narrowed into a single, crushing decision. The note in his hand felt like it weighed a ton, its implications sinking deeper with every passing second. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was irreversibly slipping through his fingers, and no matter how hard he tried to hold on, the truth kept slipping away like sand. He had always trusted Leo. Trusted him in ways that went beyond business. Caleb had confided in him about his struggles, his dreams, and his fears. Leo had been the one who had reassured him when things were tough, the one who had given him a sense of stability when everything around him felt like it was crumbling. But now, standing in front of him, the man who had been his closest friend and ally was someone Caleb didn't recognize. The Leo he had known, the Leo he had leaned on, was gone. And in his place stood a man who was part of the very conspiracy Caleb had been fighting to uncover. He wasn't just a bystander or a misguided soul. He was an active player, someone who had helped manipulate Caleb into a situation he didn't fully understand. "Why, Leo?" Caleb's voice was hoarse, almost pleading, as he tried to understand what had happened. "Why didn't you tell me? Why pull me into this mess? What was the point of all this?" Leo's expression didn't change. He wasn't angry or defensive. He was just detached. "It wasn't personal, Caleb. It never was." The words came out flat, like he was reciting a script he had been forced to memorize. "I did what I had to do. You were always a part of the plan. You were always going to be the key." Caleb's heart hammered in his chest, a mixture of fury and heartbreak crashing through him. Leo wasn't just a traitor. He was a cold, calculating part of a larger scheme. Caleb had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went, but one thing was clear. Leo had been playing a long game, and Caleb had been a pawn in it all along. "You're telling me this was all a setup?" Caleb's voice was shaking now. The anger was beginning to replace the disbelief, but it wasn't enough to clear the fog in his mind. "From the very beginning?" "From the start," Leo confirmed, his tone unnervingly calm. "You think Ava and I are the only ones involved in this? Think again. This goes deeper than you know, Caleb. There are people who want the restaurant, people who want you out of the picture permanently." And then Leo said something that cut through Caleb like a knife. "If you want to live, you'll stay out of this. Walk away from the restaurant, from all of it. Walk away from me." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence, heavy and suffocating. Caleb felt the weight of Leo's words crushing him, the implications seeping in deeper than any betrayal could have. Leo wasn't offering him a chance at redemption, a path back to safety. He was giving him a choice: surrender or die. The stakes had never been higher, and Caleb felt every fiber of his being rebel against the notion of giving up. He couldn't just walk away, not when he had come so far, not when the truth was finally within his grasp. But what if Leo was right? What if pushing forward, uncovering more about the people behind the plot, would lead to his destruction? The fear for his life, for Claire's safety, for the restaurant he had built from the ground up, all collided in a whirlwind of impossible choices. He had to protect what mattered, but at what cost? "How could you do this to me?" Caleb whispered, the words feeling like acid on his tongue. "You're asking me to betray everything I've worked for, everything we built together." Leo's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, but it was gone before Caleb could process it. The mask returned. Sometimes, Caleb, survival isn't about loyalty or friendships. It's about doing what's necessary to protect yourself. He took a step closer, his voice dropping low. "You need to think carefully. Your life is on the line. You think you're in control? You're not. The people who are running this? They've been pulling your strings the whole time. I'm the one trying to give you an out." But Caleb couldn't hear Leo's words anymore. His mind had shut down, the anger turning into something colder, something darker. He had trusted Leo with everything, and now it felt like every word he'd ever shared, every moment of support and encouragement, had been a lie. Leo wasn't trying to help him. He was trying to manipulate him into submission. The silence in the room stretched on, thick and unbearable. Caleb felt as though he was drowning in it, every breath more suffocating than the last. What was he supposed to do now? What was the right decision? But then, just as he was about to open his mouth to confront Leo again, something caught his eye, a small, folded note in Leo's hand, half hidden in his jacket pocket. For a brief moment, Caleb's mind shifted from the conversation to the note, a new suspicion creeping in. It was subtle, but there was something about the way Leo was holding it, like it was too important to let go of. Caleb's instincts told him that this wasn't just another piece of the puzzle, it was the key to everything. Without thinking, Caleb lunged forward, grabbing the note from Leo's pocket before he could react. The action was instinctive, born from desperation, but as soon as he unfolded the note, it felt like the world stopped spinning. The handwriting was familiar, Ava's. "Caleb, you're running out of time. You don't have a choice. You'll be given an offer you can't refuse. If you refuse it, the consequences will be severe." Caleb's mind screamed, the weight of the words crashing into him like a wave. This wasn't just an ultimatum from Leo, it was an order from Ava, and that meant the stakes were much, much higher than he could have ever imagined. He wasn't just fighting for his future anymore. He was fighting for his very life, and maybe the lives of the people he loved most. But the note didn't just end there. The last line sent a chill down his spine. "If you want to protect Claire, you know what you have to do." The words hit Caleb like a freight train. Now, the choice wasn't just between his life and his mission. It was between everything he had ever believed and the safety of the one person who meant everything to him. He could walk away from the truth, from the restaurant, from everything he had fought for, but it wouldn't just be his life he was giving up. It would be Claire's as well. Tears of frustration burned in Caleb's eyes, but he wiped them away, refusing to let Leo see his weakness. The truth was, there was no easy way out of this. There was no path that led to redemption without sacrifice. And now, the real question wasn't just what Caleb was willing to give up, it was what he was willing to lose. "I'll never walk away from the truth," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with conviction. "But I swear to you, Leo, if anything happens to Claire, I will make sure you regret this." Leo didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a dark smile, one that sent a shiver down Caleb's spine. "We'll see how far you're willing to go, Caleb." And with that, the door to Caleb's world slammed shut, leaving him to face an impossible decision, one that would change everything he knew and could very well cost him more than he ever imagined. Caleb's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest as the weight of Ava's words settled over him like a dark cloud. Everything he had believed about the world, about the people he'd trusted, was suddenly unraveling, piece by piece, faster than he could process. But what hit hardest was the realization that it wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just his life on the line. It was Claire's, the restaurant's future, and the very core of everything he had fought to build. The conspiracy wasn't just a petty scheme to ruin his business. No, it was something much bigger, something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. As Caleb left the storage room, he could feel the air around him grow thicker with each step he took. Leo's chilling words echoed in his mind. "You're not in control. You never were." The weight of that realization crushed him as he tried to piece together everything he knew so far. Leo wasn't just a pawn. He was a key player, but not the only one. And as much as Caleb wanted to confront him, demand answers, the stakes had escalated beyond anything he had prepared for. He needed to act. Fast. But first there was Claire. The threat against her safety was far too real now, and Caleb couldn't ignore the fact that she might be in even more danger than he realized. He had to get to her, had to make sure she was safe. His mind flashed to the last conversation they'd had, how she had warned him to be careful, how she had sensed something wasn't right even before he did. Was she already aware of the conspiracy, or had she unknowingly been dragged into it? The thought that she might have been kept in the dark, just like him, ate away at Caleb, but there was no time to dwell on it now. Racing through the dimly lit halls of his restaurant, Caleb's thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a business rivalry. This was organized, well-planned, and all-encompassing. The people involved, Leonard Pierce, Ava, Leo, were just the beginning. He needed to dig deeper, and he needed to do it now before anyone else was hurt. He slammed the door open to his office and grabbed his phone, dialing Claire's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before the voicemail picked up. Panic bubbled up inside him, but he couldn't let himself give in to it. Not now. He couldn't afford to let fear control him. He left a brief message, trying to keep his voice steady despite the chaos clawing at him from all sides. "Claire, it's Caleb. Something's wrong. I need you to listen to me.
Get out of sight now.
I don't know who to trust anymore, but you need to stay safe. I'll explain everything later." As he hung up, a sudden noise from the hallway broke through the tension, and Caleb instinctively reached for the door, only to freeze mid-motion when he saw who was standing in the doorway. It was Jamie, his old friend, his business partner, the one person Caleb had been certain he could trust. But as Jamie stepped into the room, Caleb's gut twisted with unease. Something was off about him. The man he knew, the one who had helped him build the restaurant from nothing, was gone. In his place stood someone Caleb didn't recognize. "Caleb, we need to talk," Jamie said, his voice colder than Caleb had ever heard it. "There's a lot more going on here than you realize." "What do you mean?" Caleb demanded, trying to keep his voice even. He couldn't afford to show weakness now. Not with so much at stake. Jamie took a step forward, his eyes darting to the door as if making sure no one was listening. "You're in over your head. You don't understand what you're really up against. What Ava and Leo have been doing, what they've planned. It's not just about the restaurant. This goes back years, Caleb. There's something bigger, something much more dangerous than you can even imagine." For a moment, Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He could feel his chest tightening, his breath quickening. Bigger? What did Jamie mean? And why was he acting like this? Was Jamie really trying to help, or was he just another player in the game, leading Caleb down a path that would ultimately destroy him? "You're telling me you know about this?" Caleb asked, trying to maintain control. "You've known all along?" Jamie didn't meet his gaze, his eyes flicking nervously to the side. "I didn't have a choice," he muttered. "I've been trying to protect you. I didn't want you to get involved. But there's no turning back now. Ava, Leo, they've been planning this for years. They've used you as a pawn from the very beginning, Caleb. Everything you've done, everything you've built, it's all been part of their plan." The words hit Caleb like a freight train. He staggered back, his mind trying to piece together what Jamie was saying, but nothing made sense. "What are you talking about? You've been working with them this whole time? Why didn't you tell me?" Jamie looked pained, but Caleb could see the hesitation in his eyes. I didn't want to. I really didn't, Caleb. But I was in too deep. I thought I could stop it. Thought I could protect you, but now it's too late. It's much worse than we thought. Caleb felt his stomach churn. Protect him? Stop it? None of this made sense. He couldn't fathom the depth of the deception, couldn't wrap his mind around the fact that the very people he trusted, the ones closest to him, had been working against him the entire time. Before Caleb could process what Jamie was saying, the door to his office suddenly slammed open with such force it rattled the windows. Standing in the doorway was Leonard Pierce himself. The man Caleb had thought was just a distant, wealthy businessman with a grudge against him. But now, standing there, the smile that stretched across Leonard's face was one Caleb would never forget. It was the smile of a man who had orchestrated every move, every decision, every lie. You didn't think I'd let you run away with the truth, did you? Leonard's voice was smooth, almost mocking, as he walked into the room like he owned it. Caleb's mind was reeling, but as Leonard's gaze fell on Jamie, something clicked. Jamie wasn't just caught in the middle. He was with Leonard. He had always been with him. You've been working with him all along, Caleb said, the words barely escaping his lips. It wasn't a question anymore. It was the horrifying truth. Jamie had been a traitor. And Leonard? Leonard wasn't just a businessman. He was the mastermind behind the entire plot. We've all been working together, Caleb, Leonard said, stepping closer. Everything you've worked for was just part of the plan. You were never in control. And now, the final phase begins. Caleb's blood ran cold as he realized the scope of the conspiracy wasn't just about his restaurant. It was about something far bigger, something far more dangerous. And now, with Leonard, Jamie, Ava, and Leo all involved, Caleb had to make a choice. He could fight back, risk everything, but the odds were against him. Or he could step away, leave the truth behind, and save his own life. But at what cost? The night was thick with tension as Caleb stood in the center of the abandoned warehouse, the dim light flickering overhead casting long shadows across the cracked concrete floor. His heart was pounding, and every nerve in his body screamed at him to turn back, to run, but there was no turning back now. Not after everything he had learned, not after everything he had lost. This was it, the final confrontation. The pieces were finally falling into place, and Caleb knew that whatever happened next would change his life forever. Standing across from him, Leonard Pierce, calm, collected, and deadly, smiled as if this were just another game, another round in the chess match he had been playing for years. But this time, the stakes weren't just about power or money. They were about survival. Claire's life, the restaurant, everything Caleb had worked for, all of it had led him to this moment. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place when Caleb had found the hidden ledger in the back office, the one that showed not only Leonard's extensive financial holdings, but also his connections to a shadowy network of investors and criminals. Leonard hadn't been after Caleb's restaurant for the reasons Caleb had thought. It wasn't about revenge or competition. No, it was part of a much larger plan, a scheme to take over a chain of high-value properties, and the restaurant was just the first domino to fall. But now, standing face-to-face with a man who had orchestrated this entire web of deception, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. There was a final piece of the puzzle that he hadn't quite put together yet. Something about Leonard's motives didn't add up. As the tension in the room grew thick, Caleb realized that the confrontation wasn't just about confronting Leonard. It was about confronting everything that had led him here. Every choice, every mistake, every betrayal. It was all converging in this moment, and he knew that if he didn't get it right, everything would be lost. "You've been playing me, Leonard," Caleb said, his voice low but steady. "But I'm not going to let you win. This ends tonight." Leonard chuckled, his gaze never leaving Caleb's. "You're too late, Caleb. You always have been. You think you've figured it all out? The truth is, you're just a small piece in a much larger game. I've been planning this for years. Everything you've worked for was always meant to fall into my hands." "Not anymore," Caleb shot back, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're going to pay for what you've done, for everything you've taken from me. From Claire." The mention of Claire made Leonard's smile falter for just a second, but then it returned, even colder than before. "You think this is about Claire?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You really think she's the key to all of this? You've been so blind, Caleb. She was always part of the plan, too." A chill ran down Caleb's spine. What did he mean? His mind raced as he tried to piece together what Leonard was implying. Everything Caleb had believed about the conspiracy, about Claire's role in it, was suddenly thrown into question. She had always been on his side, hadn't she? But the uncertainty was creeping in now, filling every corner of his thoughts. Was she just another pawn? Had she been playing him this whole time? The question gnawed at him, but there was no time to dwell on it.
Not now.
Leonard stepped forward, his confidence only growing. "I told you, Caleb. You're out of your depth. All the pieces are in place. I'm not just taking your business. I'm taking everything." With a sudden, sharp movement, Leonard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He tossed it onto the floor between them with a casual flick, as if it were nothing more than a prop in this twisted game. Caleb stared at the envelope, his gut twisting with dread. He didn't want to touch it, but he knew he had no choice. He bent down, grabbed it, and opened it. The contents were a shock. Photos. Photos of Claire. Photos of her in various locations, at home, walking the streets, even in Caleb's own restaurant, looking over her shoulder as if she was being watched. The images made Caleb's stomach churn. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice rising in disbelief. Leonard leaned in, his voice a cold whisper. "That's your leverage, Caleb. Claire's been helping us all along. She's been a part of this from the very start. Those photos are the proof you need to understand that you've been a fool. She's not the innocent girl you thought she was." Caleb's world seemed to tilt on its axis. His vision blurred for a moment, the room spinning around him.
Claire. No.
It couldn't be true. Not her. He refused to believe it. But then, a sudden, gut-wrenching thought hit him. What if Leonard was right? What if she had been involved all along? Just as the realization began to settle in, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse, breaking Caleb's trance. The sound of footsteps rapidly approaching filled the space. Caleb spun around just in time to see Claire burst through the door, her face flushed with panic. She wasn't alone. Behind her was none other than Jamie. Caleb's stomach dropped. "Claire." "No!" Caleb shouted, but she didn't respond. Instead, she moved toward Leonard, her eyes locked on him with a coldness Caleb had never seen before. "It's true, Caleb," Claire said, her voice distant. "I've been working with them. I never wanted it to go this far, but I didn't have a choice. They've been watching me, controlling me. You think you're the only one who's been manipulated? I was in too deep. You don't understand. They threatened my family, Caleb. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd kill them. I had no choice." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. He staggered back, his mind racing, trying to process what she was saying. Everything he had fought for, everything he thought he understood, was falling apart. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Caleb asked, his voice breaking as the anger and pain welled up inside him. "Why didn't you come to me?" Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I couldn't. You wouldn't have understood. I was trying to protect you from the truth. And now we're both trapped," Caleb said, his voice low. His heart was racing, his body trembling with the weight of the situation. "You and me, Claire. We're both pawns in their game." For a moment, it felt as if the entire world had come crashing down around them. But in that split second of despair, a sound rang out. A loud, distinct click. Caleb's breath caught in his throat as he looked up, seeing Leo standing in the doorway, a gun in his hand, pointed directly at Caleb. "I think it's time we finish this," Leo said, his voice devoid of emotion. Everything Caleb had fought for, the truth, his family, his business, was on the line in that moment. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for everything that mattered. But as he looked at Claire, as he saw the fear in her eyes, something deep inside him stirred. He wouldn't give up without a fight.
Not now.
Not ever. And then, Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a gunshot rang out from the darkness of the warehouse, but it wasn't Caleb's life that was taken. It was Leonard Pierce who fell, his body crumpling to the ground, a look of disbelief etched across his face. Caleb's heart stopped. The room fell silent as the truth finally dawned on him. Jamie had betrayed Leonard. He had been working against him all along, playing his own game. And now, as the dust settled, Caleb understood. This battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. But the final twist had changed everything. Jamie had been playing both sides, and now, Caleb had to decide who he could trust. The dust had barely settled when Caleb stood over Leonard's lifeless body, his heart still pounding in his chest. The gunshot had been a violent punctuation to the chaos, but now, with the silence pressing in, it felt as though the entire world had come to a standstill. For a brief moment, Caleb could only stare at the man who had been behind everything: the betrayal, the manipulation, the games. And yet, even though Leonard was gone, it didn't feel like the end. The weight of everything was still there, still pressing on Caleb's shoulders. Claire, still frozen in shock, was barely a few feet away, her eyes wide with disbelief. Jamie, standing in the shadows of the doorway, was equally silent, his expression unreadable. The air felt thick with the unsaid, with questions that couldn't be answered, at least not yet. It had all come to this final confrontation. Leonard was dead. The conspiracy, the lies, and the manipulation were all exposed. But what now? What was left for Caleb, for Claire, for any of them? The world that had once seemed so solid, so predictable, now felt utterly broken, the pieces scattered across the ground like shards of glass. Caleb looked at Claire, his eyes searching hers for something, anything, that could explain the last few days, the last few months. Her betrayal had cut deeper than anything he had imagined, but now, standing in front of him, he could see the tears welling up in her eyes, the guilt and the regret that had always been there, hidden behind the facade she had put up to protect herself. She had been a victim too, in her own way. But the trust between them, the bond they had shared, was fractured beyond repair. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible over the heavy silence. "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of it. But I couldn't get out. They had my family. I thought if I helped them, if I played along, I could protect you. But I was wrong. I couldn't see it." Caleb's chest tightened, the words stinging like salt in an open wound. It wasn't just her actions that hurt, it was the years of lies, of hiding the truth. But in the end, he knew he had to let it go. They both had been trapped, just in different ways. And yet, no matter how much he wanted to hold on to the pain, the anger, he knew there was no future in that. He had to move forward. They both had to. But even as he took a step toward her, his mind couldn't escape the deeper question that had been hanging over everything from the start. Why had this all happened? Why had Leonard gone to such lengths? What had he wanted, and what had been the ultimate prize? There were pieces still missing, and Caleb knew they always would be. Even in death, Leonard's twisted ambitions hadn't been fully revealed, and that uncertainty would hang in the air for a long time. Jamie stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he looked between Caleb and Claire. "I didn't have a choice either," he muttered, almost to himself. "I was trying to protect you, Caleb. I didn't know how deep this would go. I thought I could control it. But now it's too late.
There's no going back."
Caleb stared at him, a mixture of disbelief and resentment filling him. Jamie had betrayed him too, just like Claire. But now there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't the calculating coldness that Caleb had seen before. There was genuine regret, genuine pain. Still, that didn't change the fact that Jamie had been just as much a part of this as Leonard, and Caleb wasn't sure he could ever trust him again. But in that moment, he realized that there were no easy answers. No one walked away from this unscathed. The line between right and wrong had blurred so much that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. "We need to go," Caleb said, his voice hoarse. He turned away from the scene, knowing that he needed to get Claire out of there. He couldn't change what had happened, couldn't fix the broken pieces of his life. But at least, for now, he could control what came next. Let's get out of here. We'll figure this out. Together. As they made their way out of the warehouse, the weight of what had just transpired began to settle over Caleb. The city around them felt eerily quiet as they walked, the distant hum of traffic a faint reminder that life was still going on outside of their world. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something vital that he hadn't yet uncovered. Leonard's death had ended one chapter, but it had opened up a dozen more questions. Why had Leonard targeted him in the first place? What was the true scope of the conspiracy? What did Jamie know? And what was he still hiding? Even though Caleb had won this battle, he knew the war wasn't over. The darkness that had descended upon his life wasn't simply going to fade away. There would always be more shadows lurking just out of reach. As they reached the car, Caleb glanced over at Claire. She was silent, her face pale, her eyes lost in thought. The silence between them felt heavy, like an invisible wall that neither of them knew how to break. But Caleb knew that no matter how much he wanted to fix things, some things couldn't be fixed. The past was gone. What mattered now was what they did next. The future was uncertain, but it was still theirs to shape. Just as they were about to drive off, Caleb's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes narrowing as he saw the message flashing on the screen. You may have won this round, but it's not over yet. We'll be watching. No name, no signature, just a chilling reminder that even in the wake of Leonard's death, the web of deception was far from untangled. As Caleb tossed the phone onto the seat beside him, he looked at Claire one last time. There's more, isn't there? He asked quietly, knowing that she would understand what he meant. She nodded slowly, her lips pressing together as if she were trying to find the right words. I'm not sure. But whatever it is, Caleb, we'll face it together. I'll fight for you. I'll fight for us. And as the car sped off into the night, Caleb allowed himself a brief moment of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, still fraught with danger and deception, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a flicker of peace. The past may never be fully understood, and the future may still hold dark secrets, but he wasn't alone. And that, in itself, was a victory. But just as they turned a corner, Caleb's mind flashed to one final, lingering thought. Who else was watching? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else out there, someone even more dangerous than Leonard had been, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The story might have ended tonight, but the battle was far from over.